They say a mother's love is unconditional. That no matter the mistake, no matter the burden, family is meant to protect its own. But on a cold, unforgiving night in Mississippi, one grandmother did the unthinkable. Not out of rage. Not out of madness. But out of something far darker, something she believed was righteous. The child never stood a chance. This was no crime of passion. This was a choice. A calculated act of destruction, carried out by the very woman who should have been her greatest protector. The reason? Because in her eyes, the child was a stain. A disgrace. A bastard. And for that sin, she had to die. How does a grandmother, a woman meant to nurture and protect, become the executioner of her own blood? What happens when the shame of a name outweighs the value of a life? Before we unravel this chilling case, like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories of love, betrayal, and unimaginable horror. Tameka Redding, a 52-year-old woman, was the kind of woman people both feared and admired. In her small Mississippi town, she carried herself with an air of authority, her every step a reminder that she was a woman who demanded respect. She sat in the front pew at church every Sunday, her Bible clutched tightly in manicured hands, singing hymns with the voice of a woman who believed herself closer to God than most. She was a mother, but more than that, she was a disciplinarian. A guardian of tradition. A keeper of the family name. And in her mind, honor was everything. For most of her life, she had raised her only child, Ayanna, alone. Tameka never spoke of Ayanna's father, not his name, not his absence, not the way he had left her with nothing but a baby and the weight of single motherhood. She had worked herself to the bone, scrubbing floors, working double shifts, sacrificing everything to make sure Ayanna never felt the shame of being raised without a father, and Ayanna had been perfect at least, she had been. She was soft-spoken, obedient, the kind of daughter who never talked back, never questioned her mother's rules. She dressed modestly, kept her head down, and followed the path laid out for her, one that led straight from high school to a life Tameka had planned for her, but life has a way of cracking even the strongest foundations that started with a missed period. A late-night panic in the bathroom, the world tilting under the harsh yellow light. 2 pink lines. A secret that would ruin everything. Ayanna had fallen for a boy, a brief love story that meant everything to her but nothing to him. Malik was tall, charming, full of sweet words and empty promises. A high school senior who swore he loved her until the moment she told him the truth. And just like that, he was gone. The day Ayanna told her mother, the air in their tiny home turned to glass, sharp, fragile, ready to break. Tameka's silence was worse than her screaming. She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping slow, rhythmic beats against the wood, her face unreadable. Then, in a voice colder than steel, she spoke. "You ruined yourself," Ayanna begged, swore she would make things right, but the damage was done. The shame was already there, bleeding into the walls, staining their legacy. There was no baby shower. No warm words of encouragement. Only anger. Disgust. A deep, unshakable belief that Ayanna had damned herself and their family forever. The months dragged on, a slow suffocation. Tameka refused to acknowledge the growing life inside her daughter, treating her pregnancy like an ugly stain she could scrub away if she just tried hard enough. And then, Zariah was born. She was small, beautiful, perfect, everything Ayanna had hoped for. The moment she held her daughter, she knew she had made the right choice. Zariah was hers. Her baby. Ayanna would pour every ounce of love into her, protect her, make sure she knew she was wanted. But Tameka saw something different. She didn't see a child. She saw a curse. A reminder of failure. A bastard, and deep in her heart, she knew what had to be done. The walls of the Redding home felt tighter with each passing day. The air inside was thick, not with warmth, not with love, but with something heavier. Something suffocating. Tameka moved through the house like a ghost, her presence loud even in silence. She refused to touch the baby, refused to so much as glance in her direction. When Ayanna tried to place Zariah in her arms, hoping for even the smallest sign of acceptance, Tameka recoiled as if the child were filth. Don't put that thing on me, she snapped, stepping away. I told you I ain't got nothing to do with that bastard. Ayanna bit her tongue, swallowing the words she wanted to scream. She had already learned that fighting back only made things worse. Instead, she held Zariah close, whispering soft apologies against her baby's forehead, as if somehow, she could shield her from the hatred radiating from her grandmother's eyes, but the hatred didn't stop at silence. It grew. Every time Zariah cried, Tameka's jaw tightened. Every time Ayanna rocked her to sleep, she felt her mother's eyes burning into her. The tension stretched between them, ready to snap at any moment, and then, the words came, low at first. Muttered under Tameka's breath, like prayers whispered in the dark, that baby ain't meant to be here. Ain't no future for no bastard child, you shoulda took care of it before it ruined everything. Ayanna tried to pretend she didn't hear. She tried to convince herself her mother was just angry, just bitter, that the words didn't mean what they sounded like, but then came the threats. One night, as Ayanna sat on the edge of her bed, rocking Zariah in the dim light, she felt the floorboards creak behind her. Tameka stood in the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable. You better find a way to fix this, she said, voice calm in a way that sent a chill down Ayanna's spine. That baby ain't meant to be here. Ayanna's stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Tameka didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. Ayanna sat frozen, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She wanted to believe it was just talk. That her mother, cruel as she was, would never actually do anything, but deep down, a sliver of doubt slithered through her chest, wrapping around her ribs like a warning, and soon, she would realize that doubt was the only thing standing between her and the truth, because Tameka Redding wasn't just angry, she was planning. The rain fell in sheets, hammering against the roof as the wind howled through the cracks in the old house. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the walls as Ayanna grabbed her coat and rushed toward the door. She hesitated, glancing back at the small crib in the corner. Zariah had just fallen asleep, her tiny face relaxed, lips pursed in a soft pout. Ayanna's heart clenched. Something about tonight felt wrong. She turned to her mother, standing stiffly in the kitchen, arms crossed. Tameka's face was unreadable, cold as ever. She's already asleep, Ayanna said, adjusting her bag. You don't have to do anything. Tameka said nothing. Just nodded. Ayanna swallowed hard, pushing down the unease twisting in her gut. She had no choice, rent was due, and the diner needed her. With one last look at her daughter, she stepped out into the storm. The moment the door shut behind her, Tameka exhaled. Slow. Deep, she turned toward the crib, her fingers curling at her sides. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows as if the heavens themselves were trying to get her attention, but she ignored it. She moved toward the crib, her heart pounding against her ribs. Every step felt heavier than the last. Zariah's tiny chest rose and fell, her breath soft and steady. So small. So fragile. Tameka's hands trembled as she reached for the pillow on the rocking chair. She could hear Ayanna's voice in her head, she doesn't have to be your problem, Mama. I'll take care of her. But that was the problem, wasn't it? That baby was her problem. A burden. A stain. A mistake. Tameka gritted her teeth. You ain't supposed to be here, she whispered, her grip tightened around the pillow. Then, she pressed it down. Zariah stirred instantly, her tiny limbs flailing, her body twisting beneath the weight. A muffled gasp. A fragile whimper. Her small hands clawed at the air, grasping for something, for mercy. Tameka squeezed her eyes shut, pressing harder. Minutes passed. The struggling slowed, then, it stopped. The house fell into silence. Tameka pulled the pillow away and looked down. Zariah lay still. Her once warm skin cooling by the second, her tiny lips slightly parted as if frozen mid-breath, and Tameka felt nothing. No guilt. No sadness. No hesitation, only relief. She adjusted the blankets, carefully repositioning the baby's body to make it look natural. Peaceful. Like she had just drifted away in her sleep. Then, she sat down, and waited. The storm raged outside. The minutes dragged on. Then, footsteps. The front door creaked open. Ayana's voice called out, and Tameka simply closed her eyes, bracing for the moment her daughter would scream. The moment Ayana stepped into the house, she felt it, something was wrong. The storm had passed, but an eerie stillness hung in the air. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic creak of Tameka's rocking chair. She sat there, motionless, eyes fixed on nothing, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Ayana barely spared her mother a glance. Her focus was on the crib. Zoraya hadn't woken up crying when she walked in. That was strange. Her heart pounded as she hurried over, forcing a smile. Maybe she was just in a deep sleep. Zoraya, she whispered, reaching into the crib. She touched her daughter's hand. Cold, the smile vanished. She shook her gently. No movement. Ayana's breath hitched. No, 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 no. She scooped Zoraya into her arms. Her body was limp, her lips slightly parted, her face unnerving. Still, Zoraya. Her voice cracked. She shook her harder, panic rising in her throat. Baby, wake up, please. But the baby didn't move. Then came the screaming, raw, guttural. The kind that curdled the blood and shattered the air. Tameka didn't react. She just sat there, staring. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They rushed in, took the baby from Ayana's trembling arms, laid her on the floor, and began CPR. Ayana clutched her chest, sobbing, rocking back and forth as they worked. She was fine when I left. She was fine. One of the paramedics checked for a pulse. His face fell. He turned to his partner, shaking his head. That it was over. Zoraya was gone. Ayana wailed, collapsing onto the floor. Someone tried to pull her up, but she fought them, reaching for her daughter. No. Check again. She's just sleeping, she's just sleeping. But Zoraya never woke up. The official cause: sudden infant death syndrome. The assumption was that the baby had simply stopped breathing in her sleep. A tragedy. Nothing more, but something wasn't right. At the morgue, the medical examiner frowned as he examined Zoraya's small body. His fingers hovered over faint bruising around her nose and mouth, subtle, almost unnoticeable. But to trained eyes, they told a different story. An autopsy confirmed his suspicions. Zoraya hadn't died of natural causes, she had been suffocated. The truth shattered everything. Detectives returned to the house, their questions sharp, their eyes colder than the morning air. Tameka sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, her face blank. At first, she denied everything. That I put her down, and she never woke up, she said firmly. That's all I know. But when they pressed harder, the cracks began to show. Her voice wavered. Her fingers twitched. The room grew suffocating. Then, suddenly, she snapped. She wasn't meant to be here. She screamed, slamming her fist against the table. I did what needed to be done. Silence. Ayana gasped, stumbling backward. Her mother's words knocked the air from her lungs. The detectives had heard enough. The cuffs clicked around Tameka's wrists, and as they led her away, Ayana fell to her knees, sobbing, realizing the truth too late. The courtroom was packed, reporters filled every available seat, cameras flashing as they captured the face of the woman now known across the country as the killer grandmother. Tameka Redding sat at the defendant's table, her expression unreadable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. If she felt remorse, she didn't show it. Ayana sat on the opposite side of the room, her eyes hollow, her body trembling. She refused to look at her mother. She couldn't. The prosecution wasted no time painting Tameka as a heartless murderer. They spoke of her obsession with family honor, the rage she carried, the disgust she felt toward her own grandchild. She didn't see Zoraya as a baby, the lead prosecutor said, voice sharp, unwavering. She saw her as a stain. And she erased her the same way you'd erase a mistake. The jury listened intently, their faces grim as the prosecution played the 911 call, Ayana's screams echoing through the silent courtroom. Then came the autopsy report. The bruising. The expert testimony confirming Zoraya had been smothered, and finally, the confession that I did what needed to be done. Her own words. Ayana shut her eyes as they played the recording. It didn't matter how many times she heard it, it would never stop cutting her open. The defense tried to fight back. They painted Tameka as a woman suffering under the weight of religious pressure, societal judgment, and deep-seated mental illness. they called psychiatrists to the stand, who spoke of stress-induced psychosis and delusions of divine punishment. She truly believed she was saving her daughter from shame. One expert testified. In her mind, this was an act of twisted mercy, but no one, not the jury, not the judge, not even the spectators, was convinced. Ayanna saw it in their eyes. They saw what she saw, that a woman who had no regrets. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the jury only needed 2 hours. When the judge asked for the verdict, the foreman stood without hesitation. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps rippled through the room. Ayanna gripped the edge of her seat, heart hammering. The judge's voice cut through the noise. Tameka Redding, you have been found guilty of the murder of Zariah Redding. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel slammed. It was over. Tameka didn't flinch. No tears. No begging, just the same eerie, empty stare she had worn since the beginning. As the guards placed her in cuffs, Ayanna felt something strange rise in her chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just emptiness. Her mother was gone, her daughter was gone, and she was alone. Ayanna left Mississippi the day after the sentencing. She packed what little she had, left the house that had become a graveyard, and never looked back. She couldn't walk past Zariah's crib without hearing the cries that would never come again. Couldn't sit in the living room without seeing the paramedics carrying her baby away. Couldn't step into her mother's room without feeling the suffocating weight of betrayal. So she ran. Started over in a city where no one whispered her name, where no one pointed at her in grocery stores. But no matter how far she went, she could never outrun the ghosts. Nights were the worst. Ayanna could go through the motions during the day, work, school, conversations that barely scratched the surface of real connection. But when the sun set, and silence crept in, the memories took hold. Zariah's laughter. The weight of her in Ayanna's arms. The way her tiny fingers used to curl around hers, and then, the last image, cold. Still. Gone. She tried therapy, and it helped, somewhat. But no amount of talking could fill the hollow space inside her. One night, unable to sleep, she walked into a tattoo parlor. The artist didn't ask many questions, just nodded when she showed him the design. An elegant script. He inked Zariah's name across her collarbone, right above her heart. Ayanna barely winced at the pain. Nothing could hurt more than what she had already lost. It wasn't enough to bring her back, but at least now, Zariah would always be with her, always. Tameka never cried, not at the trial. Not at sentencing. Not even the day she was stripped of her name and given an inmate number. She was locked away in a maximum security women's prison, surrounded by murderers, thieves, and broken souls. But she never spoke to them. She ignored reporters. Refused visits. Wouldn't even acknowledge the prison chaplain. She spent her days clutching her tattered Bible, flipping through the pages until she found the one passage she read over and over again, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It was the verse she had lived by. The one that justified every harsh lesson, every punishment, every sacrifice. Even now, she held on to it. Even after everything the other inmates whispered about her. Some called her a monster. Others thought she was a woman too far gone, lost in a delusion of righteousness. She never argued. Never explained. She had cleansed her family's shame, but the years dragged on, and reality settled in like a slow-moving plague. Ayanna was gone. Her church had turned its back on her. No visitors. No letters. No one who cared whether she was alive or dead. For a woman who had once built her life around reputation, legacy, and family honor, this was the cruelest punishment of all. The world outside never forgot. Her story lived on in true crime documentaries, news specials, and internet forums. Some saw her as a victim of old-school religious extremism, a woman trapped in toxic traditions that valued appearances over love. Others saw her for exactly what she was, a cold-blooded killer who had taken an innocent life to protect nothing more than her own pride. Debates raged. Could Ayanna have done more to protect Zariah? Should Tameka have been given the death penalty? How many other children suffered in silence because of family honor, because of shame, because of mothers like Tameka Redding? But Tameka never heard any of it. She just sat in her cold, gray cell, flipping through the same pages, reading the same verse. Waiting for a salvation that would never come. Ayanna still visits Zariah's grave. Every year on her birthday. Rain or shine, no matter where life takes her, she always finds her way back. The cemetery is quiet, the headstone simple. Zariah Lynn Redding. A name that should have had years to grow, to learn, to dream. But it never did. Ayanna kneels, placing a single pink rose against the cold stone. She whispers apologies, words too soft for anyone but her baby to hear. She tells Zariah about the world, about all the things she never got to experience, first steps, first words, first days of school. She wonders what kind of child Zariah would have been. Would she have liked dolls or dinosaurs? Would she have had Ayanna's stubborn streak? Would she have grown up to defy everything Tameka believed in? The questions haunt her. But the answers will never come, and somewhere, in a prison miles away, Tameka Redding sits alone. No family. No legacy. No redemption, only silence. They say people like Tameka don't feel regret. That they stand by their choices until their last breath, but sometimes, in the dead of night, when the weight of solitude becomes unbearable, does she ever wonder? This case is a chilling reminder of how deep-rooted beliefs, shame, and family expectations can drive a person to unspeakable acts. Zariah was an innocent child, caught in the crossfire of a grandmother's twisted sense of honor. Do you think Tameka truly believed she was saving her family? Or was she just a heartless murderer? If she had been born in a different time, a different place, would she have been a different woman, or was this crime always destined to happen? What do you think? If this story left you speechless, like and subscribe for more real-life cases of family betrayal, tragedy, and justice.